welcome back to my channel. My name is Patricia Meredith and I am the author of Historical Mysteries. The first 3 in the Spokane Clock Tower Mysteries are now available, and that is Butcher Baker Candlestick Taker, Cupboards All Bared, and Crazy Maids in a Row. Now, these books are set in 1901, and one of the things that I love incorporating into my characters is a love of literature. In fact, a lot of the things that they are found to be reading during the course of the book and discussing with each other in a sort of book club almost fashion, the things that they're discussing in the books usually have something to do with the murder that is happening in their real life. So by reading literature, they are able to solve the mysteries. So if you haven't figured that out with my books yet, hopefully you'll enjoy diving into my books and discovering that for yourself. So something that I thought would be really fun, even as I was writing these, I was thinking someday I'm going to do a video where I'm going to recommend reads from my characters. So you can read what my characters are reading, because one of the main reasons why I include all this literature in the books is because I enjoy reading it, right? It's a lot of my favorite stuff, so it has inspired my writing. And so I do recommend it for you to read. Now, all of these books that I'm going to recommend to you were written prior to 1901, obviously, because then my characters in my book can have read them. Hopefully when you read the books, you find these titles and you're like, well, yeah, I'm going to go check that out, right? That's kind of the whole point of including them. But I thought it would be really fun to have my characters recommend them. First, we have Butcher Baker Candlestick Taker. Now, in this first book, there are a couple very central books that are recommended. The first one is Maid Marian, which is actually a short story or novella written by Thomas Love Peacock. Now, I don't own a personal copy of this. I have yet to actually find one, but since most of these books that I'm going to recommend to you are in the public domain, you can find most of them online for free, or you can find print versions of them. So Maid Marian is one I stumbled across when I started researching Robin Hood. I love the story of Robin Hood. Maid Marian is one of the best retellings of Robin Hood if you are a fan of Marian. She is central to the plot. In the original story of Robin Hood, Marian does not play that big of a role. And even in this one, actually, she begins with one name and her name changes once she joins Robin Hood and the merry men in the forest. So it's a wonderful retelling. It's rather satirical and funny, so it's very quick to get through, and Marian is a very strong lead role. So if you're looking for old fiction with a strong female character, this version of Robin Hood, Maid Marian by Thomas Love Peacock, is the one for you. Another central story that plays a big role in this book is, of course, Sherlock stories. So we get lots of mentions of Sherlock and Conan Doyle and all of that. And the main one that is mentioned in this particular book is A Study in Scarlet, which was published in 1887. And it was the first appearance of Sherlock Holmes. Also, over the course of my book, we have someone mentioning the fact that Sherlock Holmes is dead, because at this point in 1901, Sherlock Holmes had been killed off by his creator in The Final Problem, which was published in 1893. So as far as my characters know, in 1901, in May and April, so in April, May, June of 1901, as far as they know, Sherlock is dead and not coming back, and they don't know that the creator, that Conan Doyle, is going to bring Sherlock back later. The Hound of the Baskervilles is actually published in August of 1901, so that will be a featured part of what happens in this series in August of 1901, because it was a big deal. However, it's revealed in the story that it's actually Watson telling a story about, well, now that Holmes is dead, let me tell you about this adventure that happened before his death. So it's still not him coming back. He doesn't come back until later. While in Miss Mitchell's library, I list quite a few excellent reads that are found on the shelves of her library, including Anna Catherine Green's The Leavenworth Case. And if you've been following me at all, you know how passionate I am about this book and about this author, Anna Catherine Green. I first stumbled across her while writing Butcher Baker Candlestick Taker, and the rest is history, or as we say, historical fiction.
Now you can pick up a copy of my newest book, A Deed of Dreadful Note, which is all about Anna Catherine Green writing the Leavenworth case. Not only that, but you can also pick up a copy of the Leavenworth case itself, the ebook with an introduction written by myself where I explain a little bit more about who Anna Catherine Green is and her tie and her book's tie into my new book, A Deed of Dreadful Note. It's available through my website by signing up for my newsletter. You can also pick up an audiobook copy of The Leavenworth Case read by my charming husband, Andrew D. Meredith, available wherever audiobooks are sold.
This book was published 9 years before Sherlock Holmes, and very quickly you will see that Sherlock Holmes was influenced by Detective Grace, who is the detective in Anna's book. And if you want to know more about that, check out my videos. I'm slowly going through and comparing Anna Catherine Green to several different authors, including Wilkie Collins, Arthur Conan Doyle, and Agatha Christie. Then we've got Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne. Now, that is my absolute favorite Jules Verne book so far. I haven't read all of his books, but by far I would say 80 Days is my favorite. Part of it is because it was, as it was serialized, as it was published, people believed that it was actually happening. So much like War of the Worlds, right? People believed that they could, like they were putting bets on whether he was going to make it, whether Phineas Fogg is going to make it around the world in 80 days or not. And they didn't realize it was fictional. So soon afterwards, many people tried to do the actual trip, including Nellie Bly, who I believe actually did succeed in doing it less than 80 days. So you can look up her account of her story, and that is true nonfiction. She actually did do it. So it's really fun to read Jules Verne's story and then read that. You'll also, one of the first things you'll notice about Jules Verne's Around the World in 80 Days is there is not a hot air balloon in sight. Even though every cover that you see in every version adaptation of the book, you will see a hot air balloon. Anyway, Jules Verne's Around the World in 80 Days. Excellent book. Next, we have Wilkie Collins' The Moonstone. Now, like I said, I've already done a video comparing Anna Catherine Green to Wilkie Collins because she was influenced by Wilkie Collins. He did publish before her. This came out a couple years before she started writing The Leavenworth Case. So this is absolutely my favorite Collins story, The Moonstone. Absolutely check it out. It is wonderfully written. It is very different because it is collections of accounts. So sometimes it's diary entries and sometimes it's from one person's perspective and then it switches to somebody else's perspective because it's their account of what happened with the mystery. Excellent, excellent read. Then we have Victor Hugo's Les Miserables. And I have to admit, my favorite version of this is the musical version. I highly recommend the version with Hugh Jackman that was filmed a couple years ago. It's very, very well done. They captured the musical excellently, I believe, on film, and I know I'm going to get comments about that in the comments below because it's a whole subject, okay? It's a whole discussion between people who like musicals. But as far as the book is concerned, this can be a little heavy and a little hard to get into because there's definitely some sections where he waxes eloquent about people's backstories. So you have to go into it knowing that it is a Victorian novel and you're going to get lots of backstories. But it's really, really wonderful. The themes that run through this of redemption and forgiveness and God's love is just amazing. It's such an incredible book. So this is just one of my favorite books of all time, and I highly recommend it. I would say at this point, it's okay if you read an abridged version. I know, oh my gosh, it's like heresy, like you shouldn't say that, but if it will get you through the story, it's worth it, in my opinion. So pick up a copy of Les Miserables. Then, of course, we've got Edgar Allan Poe. So one of my other absolute all-time favorite Gothic horror mystery writers is Edgar Allan Poe. Now, Poe is credited as being the father of the American detective fiction genre with his creation of Auguste Dupin in Murders in the Rue Morgue. Now, Dupin appears in several different mysteries. Rue Morgue is the first one, and I make several comments about it in the story, in the book. And so it's one that it's hard to recommend it because in the end, I don't really like it. Sorry. I actually like the Gold Bug better because it's got ciphers and and, you know, puzzles and things like that. And I love that. But it is the first appearance of Dupont, so it's very important to the mystery genre as a whole. So I actually did an entire Jan term class in college. I was at Whitworth University, and I did a Jan term. So that's where you take one class for a month, and it's just like solid, intense, focused studying of a book or a series of books or a type of book, a type of writing. And one year I did Shakespeare in January, and then one year I did Poe. And getting really deep into the nitty-gritty of Poe, it is so exciting. It is so good. For somebody who doesn't handle horror well, like I don't watch horror, I don't read horror unless it's Jekyll and Hyde and Frankenstein and Edgar Allan Poe. I can handle that. And you'll very quickly pick up on themes from Poe in my books. And then one other book that I mentioned in the Library of Miss Mitchell is The Mystery of Edwin Drood by Charles Dickens. Now, this book is technically not finished. He didn't finish it before he died. So it is argued about whether it counts as one of the first detective novels and all these sorts of things. Definitely a mystery. I wouldn't say it's one of my favorites, but it's worth mentioning because, again, it's important to the mystery genre. So that is all that can be found in book 1, Butcher Baker Candlestick Taker. Now on to book 2. Cupboards All Bared. Now, in this one, we have a repeat of a couple of them, but in this one, for example, the characters are actually reading and discussing Les Mis, so Les Mis is short for Les Miserables. This one is actually discussed in this book. It's mentioned in passing in book 1, but then definitely discussed in this one as well as in book 3, because there are themes that run through Les Mis that are key to what's happening with my characters in each of my books. And I can't say much more than that, except, again, you need to read Les Mis. We've also got a repeat mention of The Leavenworth Case by Anna Katharine Green. So at one point, one of my favorite scenes that happens in Cupboards All Bared is Thomas and Marion are discussing the Leavenworth case, and they're discussing whether Anna Katharine Green was really the first to write an American detective. And it's very hard to nail that down in history because there's at least one story written by a woman who does have an American detective, but she didn't publish under her own name, so nobody knew she was a woman in 1901 when she published. So it's things like that. So it's one of those, it's hard to say who is the first, so I don't like to say that Anna Katharine Green is the first woman author, but she definitely is the mother of detective fiction, of American detective fiction, because Leavenworth's Case was the first blockbuster. Like, if you look up, like, what's the first mystery novel that just went crazy across America? It's The Leavenworth Case, and it's written by a woman, and she published it under her own name. The point is, Thomas and Marion are discussing this book, and who are the other detectives, and Thomas goes through a list, and he points out that Poe's Dupont is French, Sherlock is British, and then there's Collins's Sergeant Cuff in The Moonstone. Dickens's Inspector Bucket, who is in a couple different stories, actually. But again, he's British. And then you got Gaboriau. Emile Gaboriau invented Lecoq. And Lecoq is another one that greatly inspired the writing of Sherlock. But at this point in time, those would have been the detectives that they would have known by name if they are avid readers. So then, like I said, we go back to also Edgar Allan Poe's Murders on the Rue Morgue. We have an actual, Archie mentions it in the first book, but then he's recommended it, and now Marion has read it in book 2. And so we come back to Murders on the Rue Morgue, and we have another discussion of that one. So again, it's a short story. It's really easy to read. I highly recommend that you read it so that way you understand some of the references in the book. And then in book 2, as far as Sherlock is concerned, we've got The Sign of the Four. That's the one that Marion is reading based on Bernard's recommendation. And so that's another excellent one. It's another one with like ciphers and codes, and it's very Moonstone influenced, actually. It's very similar storyline. And so it's another really, really good one, though. And that one, The Sign of the Four and Study in Scarlet, are both novels with Sherlock Holmes instead of short stories. So they will take you a little bit longer to read, but they're definitely worth it. And then in book 2 is where we take the deep dive into Jekyll and Hyde. The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Now, if you want to hear an incredible discussion that happened over the reading of this recently, I just did a live discussion with 3 other amazing booktubers. So definitely check out that video. We talked for a good hour about our reading of Jekyll and Hyde, and it was just a fascinating discussion. If you also want to learn more about how it is discussed in this book, again, I really recommend that you at least have finished book 1 before you watch this one, but you could watch this video before you finish this one. In this one, we have some discussion of mental illness in the Gilded Age as applied by Jekyll and Hyde, and how it's different and how it's not, and all of those things. And so if you want to know more about that, check out my video on mental illness in the Gilded Age that I did, as well as that discussion, definitely, with the 3 other ladies. It was really, really good. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, if you've never read it, is very short. This is actually a collection of several different things. It's about 60, 70 pages long. So unless you read an annotated version, it won't take you but a second. Now, I do recommend the annotated version. And my annotated edition is this one, The Essential Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And I loved reading this one because very in-depth footnotes. So we've got the lines, and then we've got just very in-depth about the history of the writing of it. In the front, we have a whole why he wrote it. It was a dream that he had, Robert Louis Stevenson. And then in the back, we've got like contemporary reviews. So people who read it in 1886 when it was published, reviewing the book. Fascinating, fascinating. And then a whole discussion of how the reinterpretations of the book in our modern era has influenced how we read it today. Like, for example, the back gives away what was the twist in 1901. And so I actually have 2 of my characters discussing that in Cupboards All Bared, about the major twist of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And if you haven't read it, I won't give away the twist. So don't watch those videos unless you have read it or know the twist, which at this point, it's in the zeitgeist, which means, everybody has heard of it or knows at least some version of it, which is different than what the actual reading of it is, but it's really hard to read it with a blank slate anymore. So there you have it. Books recommended in Cupboards All Bared. And then finally, we have Crazy Maids in a Row. And now this is not the last book in the series. I am planning on 12 books in this series, but it is the end of that first arc. The first trilogy is Crazy Maids in a Row. So in this book, there's really only 3 main books that haven't been mentioned already. And actually one of them has been mentioned already. Les Mis is referenced again. Like I said, it's referenced 3 times, once in each of these books, a couple times just in passing. And then in one of the books, just they actually discuss the book and how it applies to their current situation. And that's in book 2. Now in this book, the other main one that is discussed in relation to what is occurring is Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Now, I love Count of Monte Cristo. I enjoyed listening to it on audiobook. However, if you do so, I highly recommend that you look up a list of the characters. It's very easy to get lost in the characters, and that the same might be true of Les Mis. However, Count of Monte Cristo is another incredible story of redemption and forgiveness and God's love. And it's just amazing, these books that are, again, part of the zeitgeist. We're very familiar with them. And I think we often forget and we overlook the Christian themes found in them because they're very, very amazing. And they're just very, oh gosh, they get me every time. The Count of Monte Cristo is definitely one of those. It is one of my all-time favorite classics because it's so, so good. And then in passing, we also mentioned at that time, The Innocents Abroad, which is by Mark Twain. And that has to do with the jail. They're talking about the jail that inspired the jail in Count of Monte Cristo is actually a real place that you can go visit. And in Mark Twain's Innocents Abroad, he talks about going there to the actual place. So to the Chateau d'If. Or the inspiration for the Chateau d'If. So it's wonderful. And Innocents Abroad is just wonderful for a look at how people perceived travel and other countries, and it's just a very incredible story. Mark Twain is wonderful, but you got to be ready for satire and a little bit of tongue-in-cheek. A lot of tongue-in-cheek, let's be honest. It's Mark Twain. But if you like that sort of thing, Mark Twain is excellent. So the other main story in Crazy Maids in a Row is Nellie Bly's account called 10 Days in a Madhouse. Now, if you are a sensitive reader, I do not recommend that you read 10 Days in a Madhouse. It was very hard for me to read. I had to read it though because it was really the only reference that they had in 1901 for how asylums worked. It's very unfortunate how they were run. Now, fortunately, Nellie Bly's account takes place a decade or more, but I believe it's 14 years before 1901. So by 1901, things have changed. They're not quite as bad. When you get to Crazy Maids in a Row, you'll see that. And fortunately for Crazy Maids in a Row, I was able to find the asylum book of like how the asylum was run for the actual one that they go to, the Medical Lake Asylum, which was in Medical Lake, Washington, right next to Spokane. And so a lot of my references are from there instead. And thankfully, yes, things did get better. But 10 Days in a Madhouse is really worth reading if you can stand it, even doing a minor skim. There has been a movie made of it. Again, I don't recommend it unless you are not a sensitive person. I could not watch it. I had a hard enough time reading the book. I definitely could not watch what happens in it. But it is really interesting because what Nellie Bly did was she was an investigative reporter. And so she got herself put into an asylum. And it's relatively easy to get yourself put into an asylum. It's extremely hard to get yourself out. And spoiler alert, but obviously this is what happened. She gets out and she was able to write a whole report. Now, her report was published. They went back to the asylum and were like, oh my gosh, how are you doing all these things? And all of the women who had been there had disappeared. They were no longer there. And the way they ran things was different than how it was when Nellie Bly had been there just a few days earlier. So it's very, very interesting. One of those fascinating things from history. So there you have it, the books and stories that are included and recommended in Crazy Maids in a Row. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for joining me. Again, my name is Patricia Meredith, and if you want to pick up my books, they are available in all formats. So go pick up a copy and then pick up some of these public domain books. Get your classic reading on. I hope that I'll see you at my next video. I post one every Saturday and I go live every last Saturday of the month. So be sure to let me know in the comments any thoughts or ideas of other classics that maybe I haven't read that you recommend. I would love to hear those. Thank you again. Have a wonderful weekend.